In this series, we look over cards that are lesser known that probably would have never appeared in one of the other types of videos because they aren't very good or aren't bad enough. And with over 10,000 cards in the game, there's a lot to talk about. So in today's episode, we're going to go over big boss monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! The first card on this list is Sophia, the Goddess of Rebirth. This is a level 11 Dark Fairy monster with 3600 attack and 3400 defense. Now, the majority of the cards on this list are going to have some pretty heavy summoning requirements, and Sophia is no different. To bring out the goddess, you need to banish one face-up ritual, fusion, synchro, and Xyz monster. With such a heavy requirement, Sophia's summon first can't be negated, and when summoned, you banish everything else in play. So, both you and your opponent's hand, fields, and graveyards. The cherry on top is that cards and effects can't be activated in response to Sophia's effect activation, meaning there isn't really anything that can stop the effect. So Sophia's effect is super strong to say the least, but the summoning cost is normally way too much for the card to see play outside of decks focused around summoning her, which are generally in less competitive strategies. There's a lot of interesting info about Sophia. The main thing about the inspiration references to other cards. Sophia actually has two counterpart cards, Necrons of Sophia and Tierra, Source of Destruction. The Necrons archetype as a whole is an archetype that's focused on summoning ritual monsters, and their whole story related to the cards is that their rituals draw power from strong boss monsters like Trishula, or in this case, Sophia. For now, we're just going to talk about Necrons of Sophia and save Tierra for a whole other segment. Necrons of Sophia is considered a counterpart not only for the name, but they both share the same stat line of 3600 attack and 3400 defense. But they also share the same field wiping effect and kinda similar summoning requirements. Necrons of Sophia is a ritual summon with any Necros ritual spell, but it requires 3 monsters of different types, which is similar to how Sophia needs different extra deck type monsters. Then there's the field wipe effect, that when Necrons of Sophia is ritual summoned, you banish all cards in both players' fields and graveyard. Also with regard to the Necrons archetype as well as her overall design, is that Sophia's design draws from a bunch of different archetypes of the Xyz era when Sophia was released, Necrons included. She has 2 Gishki Aqua Mirrors as chest plates, 2 Gem Knight inspired bracelets, green Gusto wings, a Lavalval tribe chest on her skirt, and Orbs of Light and Darkness represent Violon/Constellar for light, and Steel Swarm and L Swarm for dark archetypes respectively. The last reference is to the arm tattoos in Sophia, which look a lot like the plants in the Naturia cards. Outside of the card game, Sophia's design draws a lot of comparisons to Baphomet, which is mostly known as a demonic god, but back in medieval times, it was considered the god of rebirth. But considering there's a whole archetype based on Satan with Dark Lords and the rest of the devils of hell, I'm not too surprised. Another fun fact about Sophia is that the German version of the card had a translation error, and this wasn't a small mistake, because Sophia got abused for how strong the mistake was. With the German card, rather than banishing one of each extra deck monster of the type, you just need to banish one of any of the extra deck monsters from either side of the field because the wording was or rather than and when it was listing summoning requirements. So needless to say, this was changed almost instantly. But in the big picture, Sophia is actually part of one of the smallest archetypes in the game called Star Gods. There were only 3 cards in the entire archetype, and they are Sophia, Goddess of Rebirth, Tierra, Source of Destruction, and Avida, Rebuilder of Worlds, which are all cards we're going to be talking about in just a bit. All 3 members of the archetype have some of the hardest summoning conditions in the game, but with the super strong effects that can't be negated. And today's video is brought to you by Factor. Factor is a meal planning service which sends you meals and all you do is heat them up and they're pretty much good to go. For me, personally, I'm really busy and I don't particularly like cooking. Also, I want to make healthier choices since I started weightlifting. So with Factor, I can choose better foods than just fast food in order to improve my diet for that. But more importantly than everything else is the fact that the food is actually good. I made sure to try it out first out of my own pocket before I accepted any kind of deal from Factor, so I can tell you from personal experience that it's actually great. Factor also allows you to customize which meals they send every week, with 4 to 18 options available based on your dietary needs, and allows you to easily skip weeks if you need to. Use my link or go to factor75.com and use the promo code POGDUEL60 to get 60% off your first box. And once you click the link in my description, it will live update to count the purchases. Now into another card in the Star God archetype, Tierra, Source of Destruction. This is a light fiend type monster with 3400 attack and 3600 defense, and has the effect that it can't be special summoned or set, and can only be special summoned by shuffling 10 different named cards from the field into the deck. This special summon can't be negated, and when it's summoned, you shuffle everything in the hand, field, and graveyard back into the deck, and your opponent can't negate the effect or anything. So as I said earlier, Tierra is like the opposite of Sophia, and it's pretty apparent, with both cards having the contrast where Sophia is a dark fairy, while Tierra is a light fiend, but also that they have reverse stat lines, with Sophia having more attack and Tierra having more defense. On top of that, both cards have steep summoning requirements and similar mass removal. The last comparison between the cards is that while Sophia is the Goddess of Rebirth and her card art is such, where she's got an organic nature-like appearance, Tierra is entirely mechanical and artificial looking. But Tierra also has a lore-based rival card in Zephyrath. Although there are no design similarities, there's another card that directly references their conflict. That card being Zephyra War, where you can really see the two titans duke it out, Pacific Rim style. But there is some context to their feud because there's actual Yu-Gi-Oh lore regarding the star gods, Zephyra, Qliphort, and the Infernoid archetypes as well. Basically, the Qliphorts, Infernoids, and Zephyra monsters are all based off the 10 branches of the Qliphort tree, or better known as the Tree of Death. Each branch of the tree is linked to both an evil spiritual force and a gem color, and this is seen in each of the archetypes. So for example, let's take Qliphort Helix. The color associated is orange, which is shown in the card, then the corresponding Infernoid is a Tonedale, and then the opposing Zephyra is Zephyraxa. And although the cards aren't really explicit about their connection, the orange tones throughout all 3 cards and the impure force they are associated with links them together. See, the associated force with them is Samuel, who's associated with destruction a lot of the time. And with both Qliphort and Infernoid cards, you have destruction-based effects. Zephyraxa is more of an anti-destruction, as it allows you to special summon itself if another Zephyr card is destroyed. Design-wise, Tierra is a combination of a bunch of different cards similar to the other Star God cards. The most apparent of which is Infernoid Tierra, as they not only share a similar design, but also with the same levels and stat line. And this is pretty unique for card artworks, that they were referencing so many cards in their design. On top of Infernoid Tierra, Tierra also includes a mix of all 10 Qli monsters, ranging from Qliphort Towers to Qliphort Stealth. Though regardless of its monstrous summoning requirement and strong effect, like Sophia and the other cards I'm going to mention, Tierra isn't used at all because of how much it takes to bring out, despite how strong the effect might be. The last card in this Star God trio is Avida, Rebuilder of Worlds. Avida is a light Cybers monster that sits right in the middle of the other 2 Star God cards, with both 3500 attack and defense. The card also has the harsh summon condition of requiring 8 or more Link monsters in the field or in the graveyard. When it's summoned, it has a similar unnegatable field wipe effect, where you shuffle all of the monsters that are on the field, in the graveyard, or banished back into the decks. Avida is technically easy to bring up by comparison to the other Star God cards, as there only needs to be Link monsters in the field or in the graveyard on either side of the field. So if both you and your opponent have 4 each on the field or in the graveyard, you can bring out the boss monster. Avida, surprisingly, is a Cyberse monster, unlike the Fiend and Fairy types of the other Star God cards, but with its high stat line, Avida is actually the Cyberse monster with the highest defense, and is tied for the highest attack with the World Gears of the Theological Demiurge. Now, like the other Star God cards, Avida has a couple connections to the other cards and archetypes, like previously mentioned World Gears of Theological Demiurge. This is a Link 3 Cyberse monster with 3500 attack that requires 3 level 5 or higher monsters to summon, and has the effect that if it's Link summoned using 3 monsters with different types and attributes, you can destroy all other cards in the field. There's also another effect more focused on the archetype, but for the sake of keeping the exclamation brief, I won't mention it. But why I bring up World Gears is that lore-wise, it's inferred that the card is the unevolved or unawakened form of Avida. This is because both share the same type, attack, require Link monsters for its summon, and the designs are really similar with the colors and themes of the card. On top of that, Avida is really associated with World Legacy cards. Take a look at Avermax, which is a main boss monster of the archetype. If you look at the sword that he's holding specifically, it's the World Legacy key, which is an important part of their lore. Now, back to Avida. If you see her left arm, she's holding the World Legacy key. Avida falls under the same problem as the other Star God cards, where the summoning requirements are just too much for wiping the field and bringing out a big body. Especially since it takes 3 attacks to reduce your opponent's life points from 0 to 8,000 by itself, which means your opponent has a chance to recuperate. Next up is a card that a lot of older Yu-Gi-Oh players will remember, Thenien the Great Sphinx. Thenien is a level 10 beast monster with both 3500 attack and defense points that can only be summoned from your hand or deck by paying 500 life points while both Andro Sphinx and Sphinx Talia are on the field and both destroyed at the same time. Then, when it's summoned, you can pay another 500 life points to add an additional 3000 attack points until the end phase. Now, this was the big boss monster of the antagonist of the first Yu-Gi-Oh movie, Pyramid of Light. It's definitely one of the more villainous looking cards in the game. And this is emphasized in the movie as Thenien is a combination of 2 other big bad monsters of the antagonist Andro Sphinx and Sphinx Talia. And the combination isn't really hidden, as the top half is Andro Sphinx and the bottom half is Sphinx Talia. So before we talk about Thenien, let's talk about Andro and Talia Sphinx. So both are level 10 light beast monsters. Both have reverse stat lines, with Andro having 3000 attack and 2500 defense, and Talia having 2500 attack and 3000 defense. Both of the monsters have the same effect, that they can be special summoned by paying 500 life points while Pyramid of Light is on the field. Both monsters have the same effect, that if they destroy another monster that's in defense position by battle, you can inflict damage equal to half the defense of that monster. So they aren't the worst cards in the game, they both have decent stat lines and effects, but are a little tricky to summon, as they require Pyramid of Light to be on the field, which is just a continuous trap card that if it's destroyed, both Andro and Talia go with it and then get removed from the field. It's worth noting that the way Pyramid of Light activates its effect doesn't cause Thenien to miss timing, so it can't special summon itself from the deck, which is basically the intended way to bring it out. So back to Thenien, who's a pretty mediocre card for being the big bad boss monster of the first Yu-Gi-Oh movie, or just Yu-Gi-Oh in general. But to be fair, most of the older Yu-Gi-Oh boss monsters can't really compare to modern ones, So for its time, Thenien was not terrible. Thenien falls into a similar category as Gate Guardian, a boss monster infamously known for how bad it is. Thenien's summoning, after all said and done, requires 1500 life points and a niche condition that 2 other cards need to be destroyed at the same time. The 2000 life point cost doesn't really matter as much as it used to, as modern Yugioh doesn't really care too much about the life points. But for paying the cost, you get a 7000 attack beat stick for 1 turn, that bumps back down to 3500 afterwards. But what's really bad about bringing Thenien out that I mentioned a little bit earlier is that its timing can be missed. For example, if any card is activated and the Mystical Space Typhoon is chained to destroy Pyramid of Light while Andrew and Talia Sphinx are on the field, you won't be able to summon Thenien because it misses the timing. So despite Thenien being such a big scary bad boss monster, he is pretty harmless all things considered. Especially because there's no protection or anything for him, so a simple old school battle trap like Mirror Force just kinda shuts him down. And on the topic of big boss monsters from the anime, let's talk about Divine Serpent Geh. This is a level 12 reptile monster with an unknown attack value and 0 defense. Yu-Gi-Oh! Hasn't really printed too many cards in recent history with a question mark for an attack point value, so you'll mainly just see them with cards like Geh. But anyway, the effect of Geh is that it can only be special summoned by its own effect, that is, if a monster of yours is destroyed by an opponent's card by battle or effect, where you pay half your life points to bring it out from your hand. Geh has 2 main effects. The first is that if this card attacks, during the damage step you can negate the monster's effect and its attack becomes halved. The second part is that once per battle, as a quick effect, Geh gains the original attack of the highest original attack point of a monster on the field. So essentially, Geh should be able to beat over pretty much anything because it negates the effects of a monster it's battling, halves its attack, and then gains an original attack equal to the highest value on the field. But it doesn't work too well in practice due to the specific wording of the effect. See, the halving and negation effect only works if Geh is the one attacking and not while it's being attacked. So it definitely loses some protection there. Plus, the fact that the attack change effect of Geh only works on the original attack of monsters and not the modified attack of a monster, which means it loses to any kind of attack increase effect on your opponent's monsters. Or it just trades evenly if they crash their highest attack monster into it, which is one of the only ways to out it because the card also can't be targeted by card effects. Geh definitely has a pretty unique effect. However, the anime version of Geh was a lot more broken. It mainly was because this was the final villain's boss monster, so it had to be immensely overpowered so the protagonist had a challenge. Geh's anime effect is that it can only be special summoned through Orichalcos Shuno's effect by having its attack points at 0 and by paying 10,000 life points on top of discarding your hand. This was a pretty steep summoning condition, but again, remember it's an anime effect, so there was some plot convenience helping out Geh's wielder. But when Geh is summoned, your life points get set to 0, and the only way you can attack is by sending the top 10 cards of your deck to the graveyard. And lastly, while you control Geh, you can't lose the duel. And unfortunately, it's a bit of a challenge to try attack over Geh because it had an infinite amount of attack and defense points. But unlike its real-world counterpart, there isn't much protection for anime Geh, so it could easily lose to any battle trap like Sakuretsu Armor. Unfortunately, you couldn't pull off a magic cylinder shenanigans because no matter how many life point damage you did, you'd still have to destroy Geh before being able to win. But with such a crazy anime effect, how could the Divine Serpent lose? Well, in the anime, thanks to some plot armor, of course. So, let me set the stage. It's a 2 versus 1 duel between Darts, who's the main villain, against Kaiba and Yugi. So essentially, the duel is really back and forth until Geh is summoned, mainly because it's the big bad. And the game state is both players have 0 life points, but Darts is under the effect of Geh, so no lose ability, while Yugi has Relay Cell active, which is essentially a card that when your life points hit 0, you can special summon 1 monster from your deck, and if that monster is destroyed, you lose the duel. So essentially, the risks are higher than ever, and a single Raigeki can end the game. So then, Yugi manages to get all 3 legendary knights, Timaeus, Hermos, and Critias on the field. Critias has the effect that when the card battles, you can absorb 1 trap from your hand or graveyard and use that effect. Hermos has 2 effects, but only 1 is relevant for the explanation. This effect is you can remove from play 3 monsters from your deck to have this card get attack equal to the combined attack of those removed monsters each time it is attacked this turn. So when Critias attacks using the effect of Critias, Yugi activates the effect of Attack Guidance Barrier, which lets you choose a new target for an attack, but that monster is switched to defense position and gains 600 defense. Then the effect of Hermos procs, with Yugi removing 3 Magnet Warriors, Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. This then triples the attack of Hermos when it's attacked, and then the attack gets reflected back at another monster, and in this case, Critias. So an infinite loop forms where Critias has been attacked, its absorbed effect activates, redirecting the attack to Hermos. Since Hermos has been attacked, its effect triples its attack and reflects it back at Critias. And then since Critias has been attacked, its absorb effect activates, redirecting the attack to Hermos, and this loop keeps going until Yugi decides to summon the last legendary knight, Timaeus, who, during either player's turn, can absorb 1 monster inside the field, meaning that it copies its stat line and gains its effects. But rather than absorbing the 2 other knights, Yugi technically fusion summons Timaeus the Knight of Destiny, because its effect is that if it's special summoned from the fusion deck, if Timaeus absorbed the other 2 legendary knights, and when it leaves the field, you special summon the 3 legendary knights once more. Regardless, when this happens, the Knight of Destiny's effect activates, where it gains the attack of the fusion material, so its attack matches Geh's at infinity attack points. Then, in the moment of truth, Yugi rams Tamias into Geh, resulting in both monsters being destroyed, which then makes Darts lose the duel because Geh has been destroyed and Dark Magician Girl has stayed alive. Thankfully, these are all anime effects and anime exclusive cards, so you won't really need to worry about any of these insane game-breaking effects at play. Alright, and that's the video. Are there any other obscure or deep cards you'd like to see in this series? If so, please let us know down in the comments below.